One of the biggest problems with religious believers of all types is the fact that they simply refuse to acknowledge the difference between knowing and believing. And without acknowledging the difference between knowing something and believing something, anything goes because people will simply claim to know anything they want. So we must do our best to make the distinction as we evaluate each case on its own merits. So, what's the difference between knowing and believing? In essence, when you believe something, you're taking something for granted that cannot be proven to be true. When you know something, it can be proven to be true. For example, we know 2 plus 2 equals 4. No matter what language the question is asked in, as long as the concept of 2 is understood correctly, the answer will always be 4. It can never be anything different. We know when water gets hot enough, it'll boil, and when it gets cold enough, it'll freeze. We know humans will die without oxygen, and they'll die without water. We know when 2 dogs mate, the female will not give birth to a platypus. We know these things to be true because they can be proven to be true. There's absolutely no evidence to the contrary. However, when we believe something, especially concerning religious affairs, there's tons of evidence to the contrary. Just ask the people who believe in another religion. There are laws of nature and the law of cause and effect, and some of these we know and some of these we don't. That's what science is all about. This is why Francis Bacon said, in order to command nature, we must first obey it. When we know something, it's an absolute. When we believe something, we do not know it. It's a belief because it's either not true or we simply don't have the evidence to know it. Making the distinction between knowing and believing is what wisdom is all about. It can be a very difficult thing to do, and we all make mistakes, but it's impossible to do if you let others do your thinking for you. In essence, it's impossible if you just believe what others tell you. Most people only make the distinction between knowing and believing when their backs are against the wall and they're intellectually forced to, but it's a distinction that must be made in order to gain true wisdom. Another harsher way to look at beliefs is to see them as pure and simple nonsense. After all, what is nonsense? Nonsense is the word we use to describe that which is nonsensical. And what are things that are nonsensical? Simple. Things that cannot be identified or proven using our senses. In essence, things are outside of the realm of seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, and tasting. If what you're talking about is outside the realm of our senses or cannot be proven using the senses, it's nonsensical, no matter how much you want to believe in it. That's why the belief in God or gods is nonsensical as well. If a theist claims to know God exists, it gives an atheist permission to claim to know God does not exist. Why? Simple. Because the theist has rendered what it means to know to be meaningless. Anyone could claim to know anything because it would no longer be a standard for knowing as opposed to believing. I'd also like to point out that although most human beings seem to have an innate need to believe in something, it's the belief that's important, not what's believed in. In other words, when talking about religious beliefs, if it wasn't for Jesus, Christians would have believed in something else. If it wasn't for Muhammad, Muslims would have believed in someone else. If it wasn't for Lao Tzu, Taoists would have believed in someone else. If it wasn't for Buddha, Buddhists would have believed in someone else, etc. Of course, if you ask a believer about this, they'll disagree, but that's only because they believe theirs is the true belief and everybody else's is false. The problem is they all believe that, and because they all believe it, it proves my point perfectly. Some examples of beliefs that I'm talking about are the belief in God or gods, the belief in the devil, angels, demons, miracles, heaven and hell, purgatory, reincarnation, karma, life after death, the soul, spirits, speaking in tongues, ghosts, goblins, witches, warlocks, psychics, horoscopes, magic, voodoo, numerology, tarot cards, Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, unicorns, or a myriad of other silly, unprovable, nonsensical, man-made things. Or should I say, non-things. For some reason, the majority of human beings around the world seem to have a problem wanting to distinguish between imagination and reality, or they simply choose not to. And I think this is probably because every culture in the world has had part of its history based in myth, legend, and folklore. And because of this, nobody's willing to admit that much of their history is made up because they believe it would take away important elements from their culture. But what people need to understand is that truth and reality are always much more important than myth and legend. And not only that, but they're also much more interesting and powerful as well. Yes, the power of imagination is an incredible tool of survival. In fact, it's one of mankind's most important tools. But like all tools, it must be used in accordance with the facts of reality. Just because the human mind can conceive of things that have no basis in reality doesn't give them a basis in reality. In essence, it doesn't make them real. There's an objective reality out there, but it can only be discovered by those who do their best to have as little beliefs as possible. Those who choose to hamper their minds with beliefs may be able to identify reality in many cases, but they automatically handicap themselves from the very start. Beliefs make all things possible. That's why they're so powerful for most people. But reality itself dictates that all things are not possible. Beliefs negate the concept of identity. If everything is possible, then nothing is impossible. And if nothing is impossible, then identity itself is not possible. So those of us who understand the difference between knowing and believing must do everything in our power to keep others help others understand it as well. And this is important because people take beliefs, especially religious beliefs, so seriously. In fact, throughout human history, people have taken religious beliefs so seriously that they're willing and that they were willing, and some still are, to commit the most heinous of atrocities because they believe they are doing it in the name of God. If anyone is interested, all of this and much, much more can be found in my new book, The Common Sense Ethics of a Blue Collar Philosopher, available at Publish America and other online bookstores. Thank you.